Do not put your worth into whether or not you're in a relationship. Like, being in a relationship does not make you who you are. I know something has to change. I made that promise to my unborn baby. At this point, it was 3 years prior that, I'm going to get us out. Someday I will get us out of here. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I promised that child, I didn't even know if it was a boy or girl, that this was not always going to be our life. Being alone and, looking for someone or just being available is just so much better than being abused.
Welcome to Let Me Tell You, a podcast where people share their experiences with trial and heartache in order to bring comfort, hope, inspiration to others. I'm really excited about this guest. I started following her because she was a guest on Grace Stewart's podcast, Why She Stayed, sharing her own experience of being in an abusive relationship and then leaving. And hers was a little different because she had to experience full physical abuse. And I told her that I wanted her to come on because I wanted her to explain that, because I think sometimes when we hear that someone is in a physically abusive relationship, we think it should be that much more clear that they need to get out, that it should be that much easier somehow to get out. So I wanted to have her on to explain that, and then to talk about something called post-separation abuse. A lot of people tend to think that once you're divorced or once you've gotten away, then you're free. And that's usually not the case, actually. There's a lot more pain that they can inflict and just frustration that they can cause in your life, even after the divorce. So let me go ahead and introduce my guest. Her name is Erin. And I loved your story when I listened to it on Grace's episode. And that's why I started following you, because you're a very big advocate for this kind of stuff now. And I will share your Instagram, everything in the show links and in the posts that I do, so that people can go follow you as well. But let's go ahead and get started. Can you share, I want you to tell your story of how you met, how the beginning was, maybe some of the early signs that you see now, maybe.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you for having me. It's, I appreciate the opportunity to share my story. Basically, I always want to share my story so others don't feel alone, and so that other people will know, like, oh, hey, maybe these are some signs and, these red flags. So my story started when I was really young. I was 16, and I was not a secure, confident 16-year-old. We went to a really small school, and you were either cool and popular or you were not. And I was not. And so I had liked boys. The ones usually I was interested in really didn't like me. And so I had felt like a lot of rejection. I had really thick glasses growing up. And so I just felt very, we didn't shop. My parents didn't have money for us to have designer brands. And so I always felt less than. And so I'm walking through adolescence as that. And then in the spring of my junior year, one of like the most popular guys in our grade, he would, be considered the guy that everybody, wanted to date, took an interest in me. And it was just like, what? You know what I mean? It was so shocking, because it's like, how is he interested in me? And so we began talking, and he would wait for me outside my class. He asked me to be his girlfriend in a very extravagant way in front of the entire band by, holding up these signs like across the band room, like, will you be my girlfriend? Like every word written on a page. And so 16-year-old me feels like I'm living in a complete fairy tale, because Prince Charming has come in and swept this insecure girl off her feet. And now suddenly I became popular, which is, now I realize it's almost like a drug. It was like those hits of, like, now these girls that used to make fun of me, well, now they think I'm worthy, and now they're talking to me, and now I'm sitting at the cool kids table at lunch. And so it just fed all that insecurity I had. Because of him, I felt now that I was somebody. Um, and that really laid the groundwork for then what was to come, because I just felt that found my self-worth in being his girlfriend, not in who I was, as my own person. Um, And so, we would go on dates. He would take me to the mall. His family, had more money, I would say, than mine did. And so I was being spoiled, you know what I mean? And just all these things that I dreamt about. Um, and so things were very good, for a while. But then slowly, now I realize the control and the isolation that was slowly building. It started with, and it was all under the guise of love. That's what's so important to remember too, is because, I would say like, oh, hey, I want to go, I'm going to hang out with my friend, and do something with her this weekend. Well, must be you don't love me as much as I love you because I only want to hang out with you. And so, then it felt like I quickly learned to prove my love, I had to only hang out with him. Um, and then his family owned their own business, and within for like 3, 4 months, I believe it was, of us starting to date, they needed help with their family business. And so then I began working there. So not only, did he have access to me during the week at school, now I was spending Friday nights, Saturday, Sunday working at their family business, being, completely enmeshed with him. Um, and so that again too, now I realize that was like that control over to know exactly where I was, who I was talking to, you know what I mean, just for him to just completely isolate me. And it was never, he would never come out and say, "Well, I don't want you to hang out with so and so." It was always under, "Well, I only want to hang out with you. Why would you want to hang out with, other people?" And so that control, that coercive control started very quickly.
And let me just say, and it doesn't feel like coercive control. It feels like love. It feels, I mean, we all want someone who wants to be with us all the time. That's a compliment. That's love, right? And especially when you're so young and you have no idea what love really is. That's what you see in the movies. That's what they want to be together all the time. So it's so confusing because it feels good.
Yes. It does. Even like when I had a mutual friend who was a guy for many years. I mean, just a platonic friend. And, it got to the point where I could no longer talk to him. And I remember, he saw us talking one day in the hall. And then later on that afternoon, when he was driving me home, he saw this boy, walking down the street of our school. And he pulled over and like started yelling at him, like, "Don't talk to her again." And it was very confusing because I knew I had done nothing wrong. Like, just talking to this person is not wrong. And so for his reaction to be so extreme, and then it was like, "Well, just don't do that when you have a boyfriend." And like, I was 16. This was my first serious relationship. So I, didn't know like, hey, it's still okay to talk to someone of the opposite sex, even when you're in a relationship. You know what I mean? And so he really took advantage of, me being very naive and being insecure to then just basically cut me off from like that. My whole world soon became him. Um, and so, I was working at his family's business. Our senior year came, and college, of course, we're having to decide colleges. And, he very quickly, and like I said, I would always go back to it was an absolute fairy tale, which we now know is love bombing in the beginning, but painted this beautiful picture of we're going to live in this house, we're going to get married, we're going to have kids. Like, and he would say things like, "Aaron, I can just see our children underneath an apple tree." And, I wanted to be a mother. I had been babysitting since I was 14. And so that was a dream of mine to, be married and have kids. And he really fed into that. And I was just like, yes, 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 I want it. I want it. And so then when it came time to pick colleges, he really laid it out of, well, the only way we'll be able to stay together is if we go to the same college, because people can't go to different colleges and end up getting married. And so I was like, yep. Right. And so, me, being very naive again and wanting to keep him happy, went to the same college he did. And then that was when the first physical abuse happened, was the spring of our freshman year in college. Um, and that's, I mean, at that point, we had been together for 2 years. And, like I said, there was very good times within those 2 years. Um, but along with, his isolation of me and like me not hanging out with friends, he would also, and I can't even remember really when it started, but at some point, he would get with those little phrases of like, "Oh, you're so lucky to have me," and, putting me down, like, "Nobody else is gonna want you, but I love you so much, and, we're so great together," and so I already had poor self-esteem, and then he really reiterated that, like, "If you're not with me, you're gonna be alone," and I mean, I truly believe that, as a young girl.
That's so interesting because I was just talking to someone this weekend about that, where they say things like, "You're not good enough," or "You have this problem," or whatever, but I love you despite that, or "I can help you with that." And it's like they love me enough to point out a blind spot that I must have, and they're willing to stay with me and love me through it or help me get better with it or whatever, and it's like, no, they're insulting you. That's an insult. That's not a that's not a good thing. They're insulting you. They're tearing you down bit by bit, but then following it up with love to where you're like, it's so confusing. It's not what people think it is unless you're in it and you get to hear the confusion and you see the mind games and you're just like, well, no, I can see it. I'm like, well, no wonder you believe that because he's following it up with, I still love you. And despite what you are, and it's not good enough, I still love you. So when you guys moved to college, did you move in together or did you live separately and just go to the same college?
We went to the same college. We lived in the dorms, but we were in the same dorm. The dorm we were in was a co-ed one, so, like, females were on the first floor, males on the second, and so we were in the same dorm.
Okay. So yeah, he's right there. He's right there.
Yes, he is. I mean, and then too, the other thing that really added to it even before, with the physical abuse once it started, was the perception from others that we were like this golden couple. And so that getting that reinforcement, which, I can't hold it against people, but like I always say now, I'm never going to comment on someone else's relationship and say something like, "You guys are so great together." Like, those words will never come out of my mouth because I don't know what they are like behind closed doors. Um, and so people were always like, "You guys are so cute together," or girls would say, "You're so lucky to have him." And that just reinforced and fed into me like, "Oh, I am lucky to have him." And, "Oh, he is a great guy." Because to everyone else, he was absolutely Mr. Wonderful. And I had like the catch of the year, in our small town. And so then that reinforcement from others just led me to be like, "Yeah, this is a really good thing. Like, I need to keep this."
So what was the first like physical altercation or what were the first physical issues you guys had?
So the very first one took place in the dorm where we were at, and it was because I had gone home for the weekend to, work at his family's business, and he accused me of cheating on him with a coworker that was there, which did not happen. And so, I just remember him being like, "You know what you did." And, I did not know what I did, but I just, remember him he grabbed me by the hair, pulled me down, and was dragging me around and kicking me. And the thing that I remember so clearly, besides what he actually did, was the outfit I was wearing. I can still picture to this day. And then what happened afterwards is that, in his room, I remember being on my knees, apologizing, crying, and begging, and just saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Because, I had obviously made him so mad. I had no idea what I had done. And so just saying sorry for something that I didn't even know what I was apologizing for, but I was just trying to keep the peace and get him to stop whatever this, had started.
Yeah. Okay. So were those prevalent? I mean, because I know they say once it happens, it's not going to stop. It's not a one-off. It's never a one-off. It usually ramps up from there. So was that just kind of became part of your relationship in college?
It did, yes. I mean, and that's the thing. And so then once it happens the first time, then it's just you're constantly, that whole walking on eggshells just becomes even more ramped up because you just do whatever, which then leads to further isolation because you're not going to leave his side. You're going to prove, that you're doing everything right. I mean, I remember getting to the point where there were other people from our school that had gone to that same college. It was only like a 45-minute, drive. And so it was pretty common to see people we had graduated with, one of which was a guy that, I had been off and on friends with. But I mean, it would get to the point where I didn't even dare, like, if a guy was ahead of me and, my boyfriend at the time was with me, if they held the door, like, I wouldn't even want to make eye contact. I wouldn't want to say thank you or smile, because anything I did, any interaction with the opposite sex, I was going to be accused of, oh, you want to sleep with him, or you think he's hot. And so it was like, keep your head down, don't make waves, just try to keep the peace. And it even fed into, I mean, I will say I love to learn. I'll call myself a nerd. I love to read. I love to write. I loved my studies. And so even that became an issue, because I was doing really well in college. He was not doing so well. And so then when he found out, like, that I was on the dean's list or the president's list, instead of celebrating, which I always say is a huge red flag, if they can't celebrate your achievements, he would put me down, like, oh, you think you're so smart. And I was studying to be an elementary education teacher. And he would make comments like, any dummy could do elementary ed. And if you were doing a real major like mine, you wouldn't get so high of grades. And, putting down my accomplishments. And when I would want to go to the library, oh, you love your schoolwork more than me. But the library was my safe haven, because I knew he couldn't hurt me there. And so I loved going to the library. But, he would just find anything to be upset about. You know what I mean? And when you just walk around, you don't know what's going to set them off. You're just constantly living on edge and just, hoping to keep the peace. I mean, that's what life basically becomes, a day to day, just try to keep them happy.
It's so interesting because again, when you're young, you don't know. When it's, especially, this was like your first real relationship, you don't have anything to compare it to. And because we don't know what goes on behind closed doors in other people's relationships, we don't know the ins and the outs. I've heard women say, I thought some of this was normal. I thought other people probably dealt with this. And it's like, at the end of the day, shouldn't the person that you're with celebrate you? Shouldn't the person you're with be proud of you to be able to say, that's my partner, that's my, whoever, my girlfriend, my wife, my spouse, she did that. And she chose me. That's a compliment. That they should build that up. That's part of a healthy relationship. I hope everyone listening hears that. That's part of a healthy relationship. At the bare minimum, they should be happy when you succeed, or when something good happens to you. You should get a positive reaction from them, instead of immediately tearing you down. Immediately, we have to you're on a high, we got to bring you back down. That's a huge red flag. That should not be a part of a healthy relationship.
Right. Absolutely. And I did not know that. You know what I mean? It was just always made to feel like I was doing something wrong, like I was trying to outdo him. And it's like, no, that is not healthy, at all.
We're not in a competition. Like, we're a team. We're not competing. We're a team. Yeah. Okay. So then how long after college did you guys wait to get married?
So he proposed to me the spring of our senior year in college, um, on Valentine's Day. I was student teaching at the time. And so we graduated that May, and I was very fortunate. I got a teaching job right before school started that year. And so I had graduated. I was living home with my parents. And sometimes when I think about how I ended up, like, even getting engaged, I knew in the pit of my stomach it was wrong. But felt like I had to live up to everybody's expectations of, you guys are so cute together. He's so wonderful. And I kept always holding on to that hope of how it was in the beginning. And so when we were in college, he promised over and over, like, you just don't understand, because your major's not as hard. Once we get out of here, it's going to go right back to how it was. Like, when we were in college, he blamed the abuse on the stress of how hard his classes were, right? So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we get out of college, this is all going to be better. Well, the physical abuse did get better, because we were no longer together for a year, because he decided to go back and get a second degree. So he stayed at college because he didn't like what he got his first degree in. So he's at college. Meanwhile, I'm at home living with my parents and teaching full time. And so I would usually go out typically on Wednesday nights and visit and stay with him. But so it really created some distance, like physically for us for that year where, he did not have access to me the way he had the previous 4 years. So things were better at that time. And me, I'm, teaching and I'm thinking about, oh, when we get married, it's going to be so wonderful. It's, going to be how it was when we started dating. So we got married exactly just about a year later. It was right after I had taught for my first year that June. And so when we got married, I was teaching and he was still going to college. He had one more year to get that first degree or his second degree, excuse me. But I quickly realized marriage was not going to change anything because once then we were together and married. I mean, it probably wasn't even a month before the physical abuse, happened again.
And what did he blame that on at that point? Like what triggered it and what did he, because they always come back and either apologize or justify with an excuse. So what happened in that scenario?
So the justification was when we got married, we bought a house that was a complete dump. Like, I mean, it needed to be gutted.
Mm.
We didn't have a lot of money because I was working, he was still in college, and I was just teaching. And so the house we bought was a complete dump, had to be gutted. And so he was remodeling this house. He was handy construction wise, as was his father. And so it was the stress of, I'm trying to build you your dream house, Aaron. You know
Mm.
what I mean? That
Yep.
I didn't understand because all I was doing was teaching. He was trying to rebuild a house and go to college, and I had no idea how hard it was for him. So
Right.
it quickly became justified of that.
So did the physical abuse itself ramp up in terms of what he was doing to you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely was happening more frequently then, one, it was kind of like how, I mean, it happened very frequently when we were together in college. Um, and then once we were married, yes, I mean, it happened very frequently.
It's interesting to me because talking about, I remember learning, they talk about when someone physically abuses you and then you let them stay. It's basically you're kind of giving them permission in your mind. They've apologized or they've justified, and you're hoping it's not going to happen again, right? But I've heard people say, but if you let them stay in their brain, you just allowed that. So now that's okay. So now we can ramp it up because you allowed that to happen, and now it's like, that's not enough. That's not showing my anger enough. So we've got to do worse. It turns into hitting, it turns into strangling, it turns into even more violence because whatever is tolerated, won't be enough for very long.
Yes, true, and that's the thing, what just popped in my head that I wanted to make sure I touch on is the other thing, just because of anybody else who is listening. The other thing that he really used to justify, which I basically gave him a pass for with his anger, was that when he was a child, he had lost two siblings. So he had had a traumatic, childhood. He lost one sibling. 5 years later, he lost another. And so, he was younger when both of these things happened. And so a lot of it would be played off of, you just don't understand how hard it is for me. And no, I don't. I have not lost a sibling, so I would never take that away from him or his family. But what I come back to is there are hundreds of people who go through a traumatic thing every day that do not end up becoming abusive. People go through traumatic things, they become better from it, they help others from it. And his trauma was always used as an excuse of, you just don't know how hard it is to be me. And me, I, know that I was raised to be a people pleaser, like good girls, make people happy. I'm very empathetic, like I realize that now. And so I always felt like I had to try to fix or help him through this horrible trauma he had. And so I would, kind of in my mind be like, yeah, well, I don't know because I haven't lost, two siblings. And I would excuse his behavior because of that.
It's almost like you put yourself through these hoops. You jump through these hoops to try to get to a place of like, I guess this is just how it goes. I guess this is grief. I guess this is, and you, again, you were young. You didn't know. And if you haven't had those life experiences or the training, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's like, here you are, this empathetic person. I can relate. We're very similar in a lot of ways. When you describe yourself, I'm like, oh, we have a very similar personality. We feel what other people feel, and we want that closeness with people, and we'll do whatever for people. We'll fix people. We can fix anyone, we think, and we're up for the job, we're willing to take it on. But it's not our job. It, like you said, it doesn't justify it. There's lots of people that go through horrible traumatic things and never harm another person because of it. But it is interesting, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's another thing that I hear a lot of is there's always a traumatic backstory, and it might rightfully be so, a traumatic backstory. That doesn't make it justify harmful behavior going forward. That those two things aren't connected. If it was that traumatic, then they should do something, to fix that or to work on it. It doesn't need to become somebody else's cross to bear because they went through something hard. So okay. Okay, so you guys are working on the house. He's working on the house. You're just teaching. You're just,
Yes, just teaching.
just teaching. So when were kids introduced to the mix?
So, 2 years after we got married. And so, this is the other thing for me, it was always, which, is something I try to explain on my page and to other people, is that you always are holding on to the promise that the next step in your relationship will fix it. That is not true. For me, it was when we get out of college, when we get married. Well, then I became, well, when we have a child, I'm sure that will make him happy. And I did want to have children. And so I was like, we're married. If we have a child, like this, he will be happy then. Especially, I knew he always really wanted to have a boy because he was into hunting and fishing, which girls can do that too. But in his head, he needed a son to do that. So yes, our first child was born 2 years into our marriage. But I mean, one of the worst times that he physically abused me was when I was about 6 months pregnant with our first child. And that all stemmed back to an argument that began about money, in regards to the house, because we had borrowed money from different family members to buy the house. Like I said, we didn't have much. And so while we were in the car and we had gone from the bank, and he was saying, you didn't, make this payment to someone. And I was saying, yes, I did. And so, yes, he did beat me while I was pregnant. It was one of the worst ones. And I do remember so clearly, after he had done that, he had left the house. He had mocked me for crying. And I remember going upstairs and, laying on my side to make sure I could still feel the baby moving. And I mean, to this day, I can picture the shirt as I was wearing when I did stand up and I looked at myself in the full figure mirror, and I just promised that baby, someday I will get us out of here. Like, I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I promised that child, I didn't even know if it was a boy or girl, that this was not always going to be our life.
I have to imagine there was some hope also in your mind with having children, that maybe he wouldn't hurt you when you were pregnant. Like maybe that would protect you. Did you have that hope?
I did, which, the first time that, did not happen. But I will say, when I was pregnant with our second child, he never physically touched me during those 9 months of the second pregnancy. So in my head, with the second pregnancy, I was really thinking like, wow, we've made it. We are at the spot where this has stopped. But within days after giving birth and coming home, that got shattered. But, that's a different part of the story.
I wanted to ask, because you're living in your hometown. Is that correct?
I am like about 15 minutes north of there. So, I mean, I'm very near to there. Yeah.
So did your parents have any idea of what this relationship was really like? Were there any things that they saw, that they noticed?
They did. Yes. There was, when we went on the college visit, I remember I got a note from my mom that she had just written and put on my bed because she was concerned, like, at the college visit, like, she saw that I only wanted to go to the buildings he wanted to go to, and, like, my dad had said, "Why don't we do this?" And I had said, because our 2 families went together, and I had said, "No, let's do this because that's what he wanted to do," and so she had just wrote, about concerns with that, which, of course, I'm, like, 18 years old, I'm gonna blow it off. It's like, whatever. And then there was a time where she had asked me about bruises on my arms, and I don't even remember what I had said, but I just tried to blow it off. But once I had disclosed to them, she brought those things back up and said, "Do you remember when I asked you about that?" And I was like, "Yep." And one of my sisters too had she actually, it was like the day before my wedding day or the wedding day, she had told my mom, "I don't think Aaron should marry him." And my mom had said, like, "Don't say such a thing." But like my one sister was very discerning and just felt like that things were just off and that it just wasn't right.
Okay. Okay. And I understand why for you that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough to leave. You were enmeshed. You were in this. Um, but yeah, because everyone I think always thinks, well, the people have to see what's happening to you. If you're being physically abused, they have to see stuff that's happening, or and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you're really good at hiding it, but sometimes they do. That doesn't mean that you're going to leave. That doesn't mean just because they noticed it and they said something that will be enough. But I do love that you can remember your mom doing those things, leaving the note for you, noticing, those things aren't forgotten. I'm just thinking for the parents, family members that know that their loved one is in an abusive relationship, and they're like, "But I've told her, like, I'm worried about her. I can see it, and it's like, that doesn't mean that's not going to be enough for her to leave, but she's going to note those things that you're saying. She's going to note you noticed it because it's proof that it really happened, that other people noticed it. Okay. So you have the second child and abuse starts again. So then where do we go from here?
Right, which I do want to make a quick thing with the birth of our second child, just because. Um, so, like I said, he had not touched me for those 9 months, right?
Mhm.
We go into, I had to get induced. We go into the triage area of the hospital, and the nurse knows I'm a teacher. He was doing his job, which was a professional job, and um, when he was my husband at the time, he left and to go get some snacks, and the triage nurse pulls the curtain, closed and says, "Well, I know this doesn't apply to you, but we have to ask, like, does your partner ever hurt you?"
Oh,
And so I always share that about like the impact of others' words, because whether she was basing that on, she thought like, "Oh, here's this middle class white couple with a 2-year-old blonde at home." You know what I mean? But
yeah.
I mean, she prefaced it with, "I know this doesn't apply to you." And it was like, of course, I was not going to say, "Well, like, actually, yeah, he has, physically abused me for years." But, and then in my head, I've also gone through 9 months where he hadn't. So, of course, I was like, "Yeah, no, he's never done that." You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
just the impact too, because I think even for me, besides people saying like he's so great, it was also I had this person who didn't know us at all that basically implied like, "Well, something like that would never happen to you because like look at who you two are."
Yeah.
And that just cemented more of like, okay, I'm just, gonna stay silent about everything. So yeah, that was part of that.
That's so interesting because at first I was like, "Oh, what a wonderful thing that they came and asked," and I do think it's a good thing that they are asking. It's my brain goes to like, how could we do this better? Number one, let's not make assumptions. Let's just ask the question. But then after hearing so many of these stories, you're going to be caught off guard in that moment being asked that question. You're not prepared for that question. You're not prepared to answer it. It's almost like I feel like they should ask it and then say, no matter what you say right now, I'm going to come ask you again at another time when your partner's not here. So if you need time to think about anything, I will be asking you again, just so you know. So that it almost kind of gives the person, it may not change anything. But for some people, it might be like, wait, I have another option. Like I have another out. I have another opportunity to connect with somebody and tell them actually what's going on.
Well, I think that's a great idea. Like, I've never even heard that as an option, but I mean, yes, being the fact that I was a survivor, yes, I think that would be awesome because it is when you're caught off guard of what you feel like you have carried as such a shameful secret. Like, people just don't on first, the first ask be like, "Oh, tell me your most dirtiest, awful secret." You know what I mean? Like, we just don't do that's not human nature. It's to hide it and keep it in. So, yeah, I think that is a phenomenal idea to like ask it and then be like, "Hey, I'll come around," and because then you can at least think.
Yeah, like what could the repercussions be if I do say something? Or to ask it and say, "I'm gonna ask you again, and if the answer changes or whatever the answer is, here's what we do. Here's our protocol. Here's what will happen." Just so they can kind of have an idea of like, okay, if I'm ready to get out of this, I've had enough. But like you said, you were like a professional at hiding this. You were a professional at justifying because of what he used to justify. Everyone thinks we're a good couple, and I should be lucky. I should feel lucky for what I have. And, you know, your knee jerk reaction is to defend. Your knee jerk reaction is to hide what's going on. And so, anyway, so that is interesting that the assumption of this would never happen to you. So I'm sure the answer is no. So why am I even asking you? It's like, well, then what am I supposed to say at that? You basically just answered it for me. Okay. So after you had a third child,
Just two, a second.
just
I
the
had
two,
a
just the
daughter,
two.
yes.
Okay.
And so yeah, the physical abuse started within just a few days after she was born.
Okay.
That 9-month period was shattered. So fast forward a few months, the house that we had bought that was a dump was pretty small, and so now with the second child, he had lost his computer room, which his gaming was very important to him. So now it was, "Okay, I'm not happy, we need more space."
Mhm.
So now, my moving target has gone from, okay, one child didn't make him happy, a second child didn't, in which neither one was a boy, and he really wanted a boy.
Oh no.
So now the next target is a bigger house will make him happy. So we started looking for a house. We found a house not too far from where we lived that was much bigger, like 3 times the size, had 40 acres so he could hunt, fish, do all the things. So it's like, okay, now this is what's going to make him happy. So we moved when our second daughter was about 6 months old, and nothing changed. And so, but really, all this time I know something has to change. I made that promise to my unborn baby. At this point it was 3 years prior that I'm going to get us out.
Mhm.
um and so the incident that finally was the straw that broke the camel's back was happened, just it was the holiday time, like New Year's of that coming year. And, basically, to make a long story short, he physically abused me terribly, including, putting his hands around my neck, strangling me as he was holding me up to the refrigerator. And as all this was going on, I could hear the theme music to Dora going on because it was an open floor plan. And our oldest, who was 3 at the time, was in the next room watching Dora the Explorer as I'm getting just completely pummeled in our kitchen. And before he had put his hands on me, he had thrown a box of Ziploc bags. It was open and the baggies had gone everywhere. And once he stopped beating me, I was in so much pain. I thought he had broke my leg. Just couldn't even move. I was in so much pain. And our 3-year-old came out and she leaned over me and she started picking up the baggies and putting them back in the box and just said, "What's wrong, mommy?"
Oh,
Um, and that was just the moment that I knew that I had a 3-year-old daughter and I had a 1-year-old daughter when this incident happened. And it was just like, if I do not leave, these girls are going to end up just like me. They're going to think this is normal.
yeah.
And so at that point, we had been together 12 years. He had been physically abusing me for 10. And I just knew it was my mother instinct that just said, this stops here. Um, and in my mind, I knew I was done. I mean, it still took almost 3 months from that incident before I was able to leave finally for good. I had left one time, I'd come back, so it took about 3 months, but I just knew. And that's the thing, I think so many survivors, and even for, like, loved ones, if, your loved one is in an abusive relationship, like, even when we know we have to leave, we can't actually be successful in leaving until we know it is time. Everybody could tell you, be surrounding you, you gotta leave, but you're never going to be successful in leaving until it's that moment and you've realized for yourself, I have to leave. And that was that moment for me.
I think that's such an interesting thing to note because it's almost like you talk about addicts, people who are addicts. The rehab doesn't work until they're ready to do it. There is just an internal thing that the person has to be ready. They have to have seen enough, felt enough, because I want to give those people grace. I want to give you grace at that moment where it's not, you're not walking into freedom. You're not walking into, oh, life's going to be so great now. Addicts are not walking into rehab thinking this is going to be a delightful stay. It, they're, you guys are walking into an unfamiliar hell. I want to say that because it's going to be uncomfortable. You're gearing up for a fight, and who knows what this person might do. And that's, I always say, like, I've said it before. I used to be that person that would be like, why didn't she just get out? Why didn't she just leave? Why would she let someone treat her like that? I was so naive. I didn't know what I didn't know. And now I'm like, she got out? Like, oh my gosh. Like, that's amazing. That's incredible because that is so hard. And it's the perfect segue because I do want to talk about the post-separation abuse. So what happened when you left? How did he take that?
Oh, that did not well. So, yeah, so I had left the one time, came back, left the second time. I mean, of course, once he knew that I had had enough, it was all the promises of I'm going to get counseling and I'm going to do this. And so, like, when I left the one time and came back, he had, well, I went to one session and I'm, cured. And, I mean, at that point, they're going to promise you everything.
Yeah.
And so, like, the day when I did leave, like, I did not tell him I was leaving. I knew an incident had happened the night before, which was very traumatic. We woke up and he's like, can we just chalk it up to a bad night? And it was like, yep. And I, got my school bag ready, my purse and the kid's diaper bag, and just left like I was going to work. You know what I mean? Did not tell him anything. I went to the family court, got a restraining order, got temporary custody. And this is where, I mean, this is God completely covering me in protection because the guilt, I felt so guilty. And I, always tell that to survivors and even advocates that work with victims, that even when you know it's the right thing and you go through all the steps and you get the paperwork, the amount of guilt, I mean, it crushed me. We got home, I've got a restraining order and all I can think about is I should have given him one more chance. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I felt so guilty. Like, what if his last promise, what if he really was going to change? And so I was just consumed with guilt. So I had emailed my sister-in-law and just said, I'm sorry, I had to do what I had to do. And at this point, he hadn't even been served yet, right? And so he calls me, and of course, I talk to him because I did not have good boundaries. Now I know, like, I should have been like, I have a restraining order, but you only can say that once you're healed and you're out of the trauma bond. And so I'm feeling guilty and thinking, how do I go to fix this? Like, now he's going to be so mad because now he's got a restraining order against him. So anyway, so he promises to me, I will let you stay at your parents' for a whole even year if you want, but you got to go back and get rid of that restraining order. And so I was like, you're sure you're not going to bother me? Yeah, I'm not going to harass you. Like, I won't ask you to come home, because when I left the first time, it was all, we should be a family and it's not right that you and the kids aren't here. Like, just very guilting me about that.
Yeah.
So the new promise was, you can stay as long as it takes. So the day after I had just been to family court, gotten a restraining order, his dad and himself show up to my parents' house, and I drive with the two of them back to family court to try to rescind it, right?
Oh my.
So I go in, write down, and I wrote, it was like, why are you trying to rescind this? And I wrote, he promises that, I can stay at my parents, and that's all I want. So we had to wait there a little bit, and then we go in front of the judge, and I'm on the left, he's on the right, and the judge is like, I just saw you yesterday, and I'm like, yes, and I explained, like, he said I can stay at my parents. And so then the judge had asked, my husband some questions, and then I remember my husband saying, Your Honor, I promise you I'm never going to touch her, like, I'm just going to leave her alone. And the judge just said, Mister, I don't believe you, this is denied, and he would not allow me to rescind it, which, I just praise God that I was in front of that judge that day who understood the dynamics of domestic violence, because not all of them, I think, are as informed as that judge was, to know, like, okay,
Totally.
you had this woman here that just filed for this yesterday, gave this whole long history of 10 years of abuse, and now she's trying to get rid of it today. So yeah, so it was not allowed to be rescinded. So then basically, my husband at the time, he then fled to Virginia to avoid being personally served. So his lawyer ended up getting served instead.
Oh wow.
Um, but so then what started was then, of course, going back to family court quite regularly, until we could get the custody worked out. I mean, and in the end, I had the majority of physical custody. He was awarded Wednesday nights and every other weekend and like half of vacations. But the whole sticking point for him, because at that time the restraining order was still in place. And so his lawyer basically came to my lawyer and said, she can have custody as long as she gets rid of the restraining order. Like, for him, that was the big thing. He did not want the restraining order on his name because he had a security clearance with his job. And so once I heard that, I was like, fine, as long, because my biggest fear was him getting custody or us having 50-50, because I just knew that would be terrible for our girls. And so once I heard, I could have the majority as long as I got rid of that, I was like, fine, get rid of it, because that's all I wanted. But then the post-separation abuse started, which, that was my 12 years with him in the relationship. And then I had 13 years to deal with him once we had left, because, I mean, when I left, the girls were 3 and 1. So those were 13 long years.
That's one thing that I think I've heard women say, I'm going to wait till the kids are older to leave. I'm going to wait because you kind of are damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's a no-win situation in their minds at the time, because they're thinking, at least if I'm here, I can protect the kids with him around. And if I divorce, then I have to send my kids to him. And this is a conversation that I love to talk about, because it's something that, because I used to feel the same way. I thought, yeah, I don't know, maybe that is better. But then so I heard, someone explain, number one, it is not healthy to grow up in a household like that. And you said it yourself. If I stay here, my daughter's going to think this is normal, and she is going to be ripe for this kind of relationship down the road. And I would never want that for her. If you leave, yes, you do have to share custody, but at least at your home, you can ensure peace. You can ensure, if it's 50-50, they get 50% peace in their life, where they get to be comfortable. They get to recognize it. They get to recognize a home where I'm comfortable and I have peace and I'm not walking on eggshells. And no, maybe it's not as comfortable over at dad's house, but at least I can recognize the difference. And I would rather, I think so many people say, I was so relieved when my parents finally got divorced. Like, it was miserable living in a house where they bickered or they yelled at each other all the time. There was no peace. There was no happiness. And if there was abuse, it was even more rampant. It was even worse. But I hope that people who are listening to this hear that it's hard. It's hard. And like you said, you went through more years of post-separation abuse, but at least your kids, you could ensure peace for them the majority of the time, because you had them the majority of the time. So talk to me about post-separation abuse. What did that look like for you?
So that looked like, I mean, that's the thing too. Just before I even get into that, with what you were talking about with having the peace, it was like once I left, I was able to just even though I still had to deal with him, find out who I was. I mean, for those 12 years, I decorated my house how he wanted. We ordered food he wanted. I made meals he wanted. We watched television shows he wanted. And so I had to find who I was, but like just the freedom in that. And like, you know what? If I want to stop and get Subway, I can do it. I don't have to ask permission. I'm not going to get yelled at for buying the wrong Doritos. You know what I mean? And so and that's the thing, for so long, I was hesitant to talk about post-separation abuse because I was afraid that if I did, some women would be like, "Well, I'm just gonna stay because I don't wanna deal with that." You know what I mean? But it's like, no, the pros, despite the post-separation abuse, that I mean, they're just so worth it to live when you are in your own space, to have that peace, to do your own thing with your children. Just enough cannot be said about, how wonderful that is. But
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you said that because I can say it all day long. I haven't lived it. I'm so happy to hear someone who has lived it say that. That it's worth it. It's unfamiliar. You don't know what it looks like, what the future looks like, but you will have peace. You get to decide, you get to make decisions. Period. You get to make decisions and you're not going to be geared up for a fight every day.
So yeah, so with the post-separation abuse, I mean, it was a lot. I mean, it's the same. The thing is, you're not with them anymore. They are on the same cycle. The cycle of abuse where it's the honeymoon phase, but then the tension is building and then it's the blow up. It is the same. They're still going on that. It's just in a different context now. So, things would be fine and, but then you just knew tension was building. Well, then it'd be the blow up and then, you know, he would be threatening to take me back to court, threatening to, his big thing was that he was always going to get 50-50 custody. That's what he was always trying, which because he did not want to pay child support. So then it was always, you're so greedy, child support, all this stuff. But I mean, for the day to day, post separation abuse looked like him just trying to make anything possible difficult that he could. And so he would not follow the court orders. I would always make sure I was on time. He would not. It'd be Sunday night. The girls were supposed to come back. He would have the girls call, "Can we stay for another hour?" You know what I mean? It was never him saying, he would always put the girls up to it. I mean, and they're, 4, 5, 6, 7 while this is all going on. And in the beginning, the post separation abuse was him really weaponizing the children to try to get me to come back, which there were so many times I was so close because the girls would be with him and he would call and be like, "Well, we're going to the zoo and we should all be a family." And then when the girls would come back, especially our oldest, that was the one he really fed into because she was older. "Why don't you love daddy? And daddy wants us to be a family. And why don't you want us to be a family?" I mean, and just completely weaponized, manipulated, brainwashed her into parroting all the messages he wanted me to get. Um, and so they are relentless on that. And that's the thing, when healthy people divorce and can actually co-parent, it's because you have two emotionally healthy adults who want what's best for the kids and they're going to do whatever it takes. When you are divorcing someone who is a narcissist, who has been abusive, they do not follow that playbook at all because they do not care what the collateral emotional damage is to the kids. It's what they want. I mean, even like when I was trying to sign our oldest up, she wanted to do gymnastics. And I signed her up for a place that was 15 minutes from where we lived. Well, he had an absolute fit because he wanted it to be where he worked, which was an hour away from where we lived, because it's still always about them. And when I would say it's like, a 7 o'clock at night class, I'm not driving her an hour. Well, what about me? It's like, it's not about you. And they just cannot see that at all because it's always been about them. It continues to be about them. Um, and so, I mean, the biggest thing was just always threatening to take me back to court, parroting, the things through the children, not following the court order, not paying child support, or, this was before I put him, before he got put into the child support system. Instead of giving me the check on Sunday when, we would exchange the kids, he would conveniently forget it then. Well, then he would send it in the lunchbox, like with our first grader to school, and make a big deal about, like, oh, you need to make sure you give mommy this money. And you know what I mean? And so just mind games, just manipulation, mind games, trying to turn the children against me was a huge part of it.
I was just talking to someone yesterday who is dealing with a very unfortunate co-parent. And her kids are young and they come home and they, say how much fun because he's Disneyland dad. There's no rules. It's super fun and everything's fun and games. And it's frustrating because a lot of times he'll do the fun things before she can, or he knows she's going to do it, so he does it first. All those kinds of things. And she said, and the kids come home and they say, like, you're not as fun as dad, or they might send insults to her way. And it's like, as an adult, I'm an adult, I have to remind myself these are children that are being manipulated. It still hurts. It still hurts when your kids are saying things to you and tearing you down, and you know where it's coming from, but it still hurts. But just remembering that they're kids, they're little kids, they have no clue. I didn't even know what was happening, and I was an adult in an unhealthy relationship. I was being manipulated at one point. Of course they are. Of course they're being manipulated. And one day they will grow up and they will see the truth. They will see what was really happening. How old are your kids now? Can I ask?
So yes, so now that's the thing. There's like a third part of her story, but yes. So now they are almost 21, and my oldest is 23. My youngest is almost 21. But so they basically took a stand when they were 17 and 14. And we're like, we're not going back there anymore. But I mean, like I said, so they were 3 and 1 when I left. And then, it was like 13 years of dealing with that. Things had slowly been building made for many of the years, because it was the same thing. He was the fun dad. I mean, the first weekend when he had them for a full weekend, I picked them up and he had gotten them a bunny and a puppy that very first weekend. So then, of course, when I go to pick them up, now you've got, I think our daughter had her birthday by then, so she had just turned 4, and I'm trying to take her away from her new puppy and bunny, and that was an ongoing thing. So like, I feel like that's a very common tactic that they do. And so, but for the two girls, they really had two different experiences there, because our oldest was favored by him and he would try to do everything for her. He kind of ignored our second daughter. And so their experiences were different. And I would always hear from my youngest how much, like, she hated going there. And my oldest was very manipulated by him. And so she was afraid to speak out. But as she got older, she started realizing, like, hey, because that's the thing, doing the same things to try to control her. I mean, there were so many times the kids would be invited, let's say, for a birthday party, but it was going to be his weekend. Well, that was always, you're not going, it's my weekend. You know what I mean? And so I think kids in that situation, especially when it's with the controlling parent, they miss out on a lot because that parent's like, nope. And so as she got older and things like that started happening, and then she had a boyfriend and she was like realizing, like, oh, hey, he doesn't want me to do things with this boyfriend. And she started to, realize exactly how controlling he was. And so for the summers, they would be there for half the summer. It was 1 week with me, 1 week with him. And it was at the end of their 4 weeks from that summer when they were 17 and 14, and they came home and basically the dam broke of, like, this is how it's been. This is what we're dealing with. These are some things that had happened. And they refused to go back there. And this was in 2019. And so after a few months, of course he was pressuring them. I had filed some paperwork on their behalf. Well, then COVID hit, which kept delaying everything. So we were in and out of court that entire full year. But they have never once returned to that house since that day when they took a stand and just said, we're not going back there.
It's so interesting talking about like the Disneyland dads, the ones that do all the fun stuff. And you can see it for what it is. They've never had a real relationship. They don't bond. They don't connect. There's no emotional attachment. It's all based on image. It's all based on stuff. All they can give is stuff. That's all they have to offer. It's not, hey, let's go spend some time together and talk. And it's, yeah, if you want to get, I'll buy you that. I'll buy you whatever you want. That's all they really have to offer is things, and kids grow up and kid, it's fun when they're little. I mean, every kid loves things, but when you start to grow up and you realize he doesn't listen to me. He doesn't pay attention to what I like or don't like, or it doesn't even matter what I like or don't like. It's what he wants.
Yes, and that was the biggest thing for, like, my oldest was that she realized she was not allowed to show or have any feelings with anything. You know what I mean? That she just realized, like, there was a time when she had a pet there and it had gone missing and she was upset about it, and she was basically told, like, "I don't care, like, I've had a bad day. It's not about you, it's about me," and, those things started happening, and as they get older, they figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that people listening to this, if there are any, women caught in these situations and they're thinking, oh, I don't know if I can face leaving. I don't know if I can do that. If you have kids and you're worried, yes, he will absolutely try to turn them against you. That's all he has. If you are gone, that's all he has to use. Your kids will grow up. Your kids will grow up. They will see things for what they are, and they will learn just like you did over time, and they will make their decisions. As long as you're constant, as long as they get their needs met from you, they will be able to, it will be so clear the difference between the two parents.
Oh, for sure, and just how the whole household makes them feel, and that's the thing, you have to go into it realizing and I think sometimes, like one time I was really made to feel bad by a coworker who she had heard my struggle, and she was one that had divorced and could actually co-parent in the way that co-parenting could be done, and she didn't know my full backstory, and she just heard me over, talking with somebody, that I was close to that did know the story, and she came over and she's like, "Erin, it's just really bad when parents just can't get along for the sake of the kids." And it was like, I felt so much shame in that because it was like, no matter what I did, I could not co-parent with this person. And that's what I think when you realize they're abusive or narcissistic and just such a toxic person, that you're going to have to just parallel parent. You're not ever going to be able to co-parent in the sense that is celebrated on Instagram, like, oh, hashtag co-parenting goals. Like you're never going to, you can't have that. So like, just realizing now, but you parallel parent and you just try to do what you can and control what you can when the children are with you. Like this is just a quick example for parallel parenting. So when our youngest was 4, she came home talking about this PG-13 movie she had watched there. And so I had called him because I had a lot of concerns about her watching that. And basically it was like, well, Erin, if you had never left me, you'd be here to make decisions. You know what I mean? Just totally thrown back in my face. And it was from that point I realized like, okay, even if I say something, then he makes a bigger deal about it. And then it just makes him want to show them even more movies because he knows it's bothering me. So it's like, you learn to just pick your battles and know like, okay, well, when they're here, they're going to watch kid appropriate movies that aren't going to scare them. And, they're going to go to bed at this time. And you just have to realize when they're there, things are not going to be taken care of and, with them the way you would ideally like, but you just have to pick your battles and do the best you can when they're with you. And they will see the difference.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Okay. So for my final question for you, I always give a final question. And if I want to ask, if you were talking to a woman, your younger self, someone who was in your position in this, and pick an age. Maybe it was in high school. Maybe it was in college. Maybe it was married without kids, with kids. You're talking to a woman who just knows like, this isn't, I don't think this is how it should be, but I don't know what to do. What advice would you give? What would you tell her in that moment?
Well, I think first back to my youngest self that got into this, because I think so many, especially, when women are starting to date, whether they're teenagers, young adults, is that do not put your worth into whether or not you're in a relationship. Like being in a relationship does not make you who you are. You know, you are worthy on your own, and there are so many people out there. And I think that was part of my problem coming from a small town, is that I had no idea how many wonderful, healthy people are out in the world. And so you just think like, you know, for me, I know I had love and it was just like I was just going to hold on to it for all I got because I didn't think I would find someone else. And that was the biggest lie that I, you know, had told myself, that if you're with someone and there are red flags, but you're just afraid of being alone, that it's just, it is not worth it. There are so many other wonderful people out there that, you know, the red flags are the red flags for a reason, and that the quicker you can end it, then the better off it is, because then you're going to be able to go out and meet other people. And I mean, after having been abused, that, you know, my biggest fear before was being alone. It was like being alone and, you know, looking for someone or just being available is just so much better than being abused. It's just not worth it.
Oh, beautifully said. And I know that you are happily married now, remarried now. How long have you been married?
We have been married 16 years.
Awesome. Awesome.
And then we had 2 children, and yes, he is amazing. He is so supportive. I mean, he is a very healthy, loving husband.
They are out there.
They are. So do not settle. Like, don't settle for the red flags. Like, there are healthy people out there.
Awesome. Erin, this was so good. I'm so grateful to you. This was exactly what I hoped it would be. And I think that so many people are, I guarantee there are women that are going to listen to this quietly and just think a lot about a lot of the things you said. I think they're going to be able to put themselves in your shoes really easily, probably some in your shoes at one point, that will be able to take what you said. And I think it'll give them hope. I think that'll give them hope and some courage to do what they need to do. So thank you so much for joining us.